Well, hello to all the boys and girls and gentlemen and ladies out there this Christmas. I hope you made it on the nice list this year. It is much shorter than previous years, as there has been a lot of news about naughty boys and girls on the internet, especially those in pesky government roles and those in big tech. But you don't have to worry about them. It seems Rudolph's nose has lit up their naughtiness for everyone to see. But the real reason I'm here today is to show you a Christmas unboxing to remember. This unboxing will finish up what St. Nicholas has been up to for the last 3 years. I suppose you better stick around and see how Santa has upgraded his workshop. I'm just kidding though. This is just a sandbag I use for C-stands. Without further delay, let's get right into the video. This whole studio project was started in the early bit of 2020, and I was in dire need to make a space that was sound isolated due to the very noisy environment that I was currently recording in, and to address the many distractions on both my own and client projects that would crop up in my old space. It is now Christmas of 2023, and I am putting the finishing touches on the control room, the primary space where I will be doing my day-to-day activities, streaming video, producing podcasts, and well, just outright creating productions. Unfortunately, it was a bad time to start a new project with everything shutting down in 2020, but I decided to go ahead with it anyways. I wasn't going to just sit around and do nothing. And in July of 2020, I secured a space that would become the new home of the studio. With the help of a friend, he put together a layout on what it should look like. After months of little work done, due to human malware and my own non-related illness, work was moving at a snail's pace. Blitzen sure wasn't impressed with the speed at which the studio was getting complete. However, he was impressed with the amount of snow outside this week. I put together some footage and photos of the build in progress. However, at the time, I was barely functioning and didn't have the energy to build and record the process. After the plans were laid out, I hired a contractor to come in and do the framing, drywall, and install the various structural bits. As you can see from the photo, the studio and control room are isolated by a double wall design and 2 double pane windows installed at a special angle to isolate noise, but also keep the vibrations down. One of the big issues we faced was street noise, so the contractor installed some isolation over the windows, and that helped immensely. The studio itself is fairly resistant to most outside noises now. As the project progressed from 2020 to 2021, things were slowly coming into place, and the control room is where I started to focus my energy primarily so that I could get some actual work done. As 2021 started to close, things were starting to shape up and become usable, although not the most pretty of things. During the process, one of my tasks was to run Cat6 cabling between the network rack in my old studio to the network rack in my new studio. You can see from the photo the strung out cable. I decided to run 3 cables together as a trunk for load balancing and then wire it up as a 1 gigabit distribution switch in the control room. That would further spread out the connections to the various areas of the studio. As you can see, some of the things that had to be done were installing custom speaker mounts, building a custom desk to fit all the equipment, with cable routing, finish and paint the drywall, put up sound absorption panels, and install the 3 racks I had purchased. One was a used sound rack I purchased from a church. Another was a small wall mount network rack, and the third was an old telecom rack that I thought looked nice, but also very sturdy. I don't think I'll run out of rack space anytime soon. I'm going to be honest, this project stressed me out. Between the cost, the time, and effort that went into this, I wasn't sure it was going to get done. Thankfully, I had help from some key individuals when I was at my lowest point. But all the final bits were finally coming into place this year, and up until recently, this is what my setup looked like. I was still missing some key equipment which I recently purchased. One was a reliable mixer, as the one I was using had some issues with the buttons not engaging properly. Hence, I replaced it with the Rodecaster Pro II because I really wanted to simplify the setup on my desk and avoid some of the routing issues with Mix-. So during this month, when there is some downtime between projects, I took on the task of doing some recabling, tearing down and rebuilding the audio-video configuration. I put together a short time lapse of the teardown and partial resetup. Unfortunately, I didn't capture footage of every part of the resetup as I was strapped for time to get it back up and running to work on a client project. And this week, I then went back to fix some of the haphazardly run cables. Now that I have the desk set up in a much more efficient way, these are some of the cables I removed from the setup, but also managed to remove 2 of the audio interfaces that were cluttering up my desk. There was one unfortunate thing, however. The new Rodecaster Pro II wasn't working as it was supposed to be. You can see here in the unboxing, this is a brand new unit. During the unboxing, I discovered that the unit may have been damaged in shipping. I found that Amazon had put the packing inside a box, but the box was far too large for it, and they didn't put any cushioning between the outer box and the packing, resulting in a package that was able to bounce around. I decided to set up the unit anyways, as I wanted to do some testing and get a feel for the unit. I ran through the initial setup, and after doing the update to 1.07, it rebooted but then locked up shortly after. I had to power it off to get it to work. Later that day, when I was testing it, I noticed that the smart pads were triggering on its own. I tried pressing them down and pulling them up slightly. It helped a bit, but one of the pads would just not stop being triggered. As you can see from the video of me here tapping the desk, it triggers the pad. I factory reset the unit and tried a few things suggested online, but it didn't make it any better. By the end of the day, I figured I would leave it at that for now and not worry about it for the time being. So I decided to go back to a blank bank for the smart pads to play around a bit with the MIDI, and I discovered in this process that by adding a new MIDI control to the pad in question, it helped resolve the issue a bit. What seems to happen is that there's a mechanism in the Rodecaster pads that when not active, they lock into place. For whatever reason, doing this helped reposition the pad, and for the rest of the day, that pad wasn't being triggered on its own. I say a win, or maybe not. It turns out this wasn't a permanent fix, as the next day the issue was back, but again I went to a blank bag, enabled and disabled the pad, and it seemed to be fixed again. Eventually the issue came back again, so at this point I realized I'm going to have to RMA this unit. There was also another issue that happened the first day I received the unit. I was not able to get any sound out of the device from the mic inputs, and I was pulling my hair out trying to figure out why. Well, it turns out it was nothing that I was doing wrong, but for some reason the unit was partially crashed. The touchscreen worked, but only for certain features. I couldn't even turn off the unit via the power button, so I had to pull the plug, the USB power, to get it to work again. Not a good look, Rode. So my replacement is on the way. I should receive it by New Year's. I'm hoping both of these issues was a result of quality control or damage during shipping, and not a widespread problem with the design itself. I also had a finicky monitor that needed replacing, which was to be used as a full-screen preview monitor for video editing, but also as the multi-view monitor for my ATEM Mini Pro. I didn't go new, but found a nice enough Asus monitor via Facebook Marketplace that would be suitable for the task. The original owner didn't bother to peel off the protective film. One of the things I learned about the ATEM Mini is that it is very particular on what is connected to the HDMI out port. It pretty much has to be 1080p 60 Hz in my opinion. Many of the other monitors of various native resolutions I tried were not working even if they could accept a 1080p 60 Hz signal. I then set up the monitor that would be viewable from both sitting areas at the desk and did some basic cleaning of the monitors. The real rat's nest, though, was dealing with cabling going all over the place. My solution was to use a network cable raceway to hide all the cables, and since it is behind my monitors, it won't be too noticeable. I literally have stuffed that thing as full as it can be, and I was struggling to get the cover back on, but I somehow managed. You don't want to see what's going on under the desk, that's for sure. I did build a desk to be able to hang and route cables, but there were so many cables being run under the desk that some of them are a bit looser than I prefer, and at some point I'll have to make some improvements to it. I put some finishing touches with cable ties on the Rodecaster cables, and I'm not too worried about having to disconnect them because it'll just be a drop-in replacement. So my control room setup now has the following devices I use regularly. The Focusrite Scarlette 18i8 Gen 2, which I bought in roughly 2018, has been my workhorse for many client jobs and continues to be. It is now sitting attached to my video editing computer as a backup and as an input for the final stereo mix from the Rodecaster Pro II. The output will then go to the ATEM Mini, as I don't have to do any mixing on the ATEM side other than volume up and down. I also have mic inputs on the front that are routed out to the studio side and a breakout cable box for when clients or guests come and need to plug in. The ATEM Mini Pro needs no explanation, as it is going to be the streaming hub for the entire setup and will take various HDMI inputs from various cameras and devices. The Launchpad MIDI, which you may have seen in previous videos, is going to be my control station for both audio and video on my main video editing rig. I am hoping that I can connect it to the Rodecaster Pro II and or the ATEM Mini to further expand the buttons. This will be a project for 2023. I suspect there will be more scripts or programming needed to make this happen. St. Christopher here will help me out on my 2023 journey in that regard. I also have the Davinci Speed Editor, which is a very useful tool in my arsenal for video production. The jog wheel and dedicated buttons for cutting and sliding, etc. has been a real time saver for me. I purchased it on sale a while ago, and it even came with a free version of Davinci Resolve Studio Edition bonus. I then have the Akai MidiMIX, which I had done 2 previous videos about, and as before, it is going to be connected to my voice meter Potato and do some software audio routing. Since my whole workflow has changed, I probably won't need it for podcasting anymore, but perhaps I can also use the MIDI functionality to control the Rodecaster. I then have the fader port, the 1-channel version, which is an older one, that works great. I use Studio One as my DAW, and it works particularly good with it when I'm doing any edits or basic mixes. I find myself reaching out for it on the other workstation, expecting it to be there when I'm doing mixes. Then there's the GH4, which has been a sturdy workhorse for many years, but unfortunately this one has an issue with consistent recording. It will randomly stop recording without notice at the most inappropriate times, and when working on a job. This can be a real disaster. It just stops, so I had to retire it from video production, but not entirely. I now use it as a webcam of sorts, as I can just record straight through the ATEM Mini Pro into the computer. I was graciously donated another GH4 by a donor who was willing to part with it for they weren't using it any longer. I am feeling particularly blessed at this point. And then there's all the analog gear. You can see the rack here with the various equipment in it. I am not going to go into great detail here, but the important part is the XLR and 1/4 inch patch bays which go out to the studio from the control room. You can also see the older equipment in the rack, which is useful for rents or even for conversion and restoration of older audio and video formats. Some of the equipment needs a thorough cleaning though, and I may make some individual videos on that equipment. And of course, there's the network rack, a managed switch configured in a 3-port trunk, and then distributed out to the other equipment. I have also had a love for networking even back in the early 90s when I found some old BNC style ArcNet adapters to play Doom or Warcraft 1 and 2 on back in the day with my friends. I also use the top of this rack for when I need to connect a device back to the main desk without cluttering up the main area. And of course, you can't forget the Canadian coin. When you're doing audio or video production, it is always handy to have a coin hanging around so you can unscrew and tighten equipment plates and such. As you can see from the final setup, this is going to be a much used setup for my everyday activities, and I can tell I'm going to really love it, and I hope you do as well. As 2023 comes, I hope to bring in more productions and more clients to utilize the space. It has been a real interesting journey, and there's always more I can improve upon. But I like to think that I'm at the end, at least in this phase for my studio project. St. Nick would definitely be pleased. Thank you for joining me on my journey, and I hope you have a wonderful Christmas. Please like and subscribe on your way out if you don't mind. I will leave you with some pleasant tunes to wrap it up. No pun intended, and have a merry and holy Christmas.